Oregon's latest commit, 2027 running back Cadarius McMiller. When I watch his highlights, he's doing the Spider-Man meme of a guy already on the roster.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time. Once again, for Locked On Ducks, I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, the number one sports podcast network out there. Thank you all very much for helping make that the case, especially my everydayers. Appreciate you all for being just that. What could the playoff picture look like? A question about that on today's show for next year, and another award to hand out for 2025 because it matters very much for 2026. This episode brought to you by our friends at Mazda. They put that same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment. Putting in the work, that defines you. Stay tuned for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. There's more to a Mazda because there is more to you. And there's more in Oregon's 2027 class to come. But for now, let's talk about Cadarius McMiller. And There are some striking similarities in his highlight tape and that of current Oregon running back and rising true sophomore Jordon Davison. It was almost all I could see when I watched the highlights, but we'll get into that in just a moment. 6'1", 196 pounds from Tyler High School in Texas. Pretty impressive. Oregon went into Texas and pulled this guy out of there because it was all Texas schools that were the other finalists for him. SMU, Texas, and Texas A&M. He's the number 249 player overall in the 24/7 Sports Composite, the number 19 running back, and the number 36 player in the state of Texas overall, which, as you probably know, one of, I'd say, the top 3 recruiting states in the country. Florida, Texas, California, I think, are the 3 heavy hitters. Which one is the best? That probably depends on who you ask. There's a case to be made that it's Texas. But he runs track as well, of course. His career best time in the 100-meter, and this definitely shows up when you watch his highlight reel, a 10.59. If you don't know 100-meter dash times, and I'll admit that I only do because I've covered recruiting extensively on the show for the last several years, that is in the fast department. This is a guy that has got home run hitting capable speed. This past year, his junior season at Tyler High School, he ran for 939 yards and 17 touchdowns on 8.7 yards a carry. He also caught 11 passes for 186 yards and 3 scores. Those were all career highs. Receptions, yards, carries, rushing yards, touchdowns. It was a real breakout season for him. I think he was someone people realized was going to be a Power 4 player before, but he certainly looks like a guy that can be a starting running back one day. Now, the incredible thing is he's got a bunch of long runs on his huddle highlights, as you would expect, because those are the sorts of plays you want to showcase. He's got that elite speed, 17 touchdowns, 8.7 yards, great numbers. Just for context here, D'Air Hill averaged 13.7 yards a carry his final year in high school. So it's just crazy to think about. 8.7 is a big number, and it is 5 yards per carry fewer than D'Air Hill, who we know is indeed a home run hitter in the backfield. But this guy can do that as well, and he can do a lot more than that. He was on the Navy All-American Bowl roster. The funniest thing, really, if you go check out his highlights, he's so much bigger than his quarterback. Like, he's a big guy, 6'1", 196. I think he could play at an even bigger weight than that. I'll get Brian on the show tomorrow and we'll talk about it. But I don't know who his quarterback is. Might be Diego Pavia's younger brother or something. But the first thing you notice when you check out his tape is he looks huge, and the guy next to him is so small. He literally looks like he's as big as me. I'm sure he's a perfectly good football player if he's starting for the Tyler High School varsity football team. It was just the first thing that stood out, and I just chuckled going, man, that is literally Diego Pavia high school version out there. But he runs a lot like Jordon Davison. And the reason I make that comparison, though there is a difference in frame, he's got a little bit more, honestly, of a Jay Harris frame, who he reminds me of a bit as well. The way that he kind of sifts his way through the defense, the shiftiness that he has for a guy of his size, doesn't look like a lot of running backs. And all I could see on a lot of those runs were Jordon Davison runs from this past year. And he was, of course, incredible as a true freshman, led Oregon in rushing and had 15 touchdowns as well. Davison, coming out of high school, though, was 6 foot, 236 pounds. So he was a full 40 pounds heavier than McMiller is right now. Maybe, as I said, I think McMiller could put on a little bit more weight and be a really physical back in the middle, but he's got that big man shiftiness to him where he moves laterally exceptionally well for a guy who is that big. So he's got the breakaway speed, as I mentioned. When he sees a seam and hits a crease, guys are just not able to catch up to him. He also operated primarily out of, it appears, a shotgun offense, so there shouldn't be any issues stylistically. He wasn't playing in a wing T or, a power I sort of offense. Oregon goes under center every now and then, but mostly it's shotgun and pistol handoffs. That shouldn't be a problem. I think when he gets to the outside, the way he uses the stiff arm, the way he goes side to side and tries to break the long run, I think he does look a bit like Jay Harris as well, and he's got a very similar frame to Jay Harris, who is, of course, now over at Kansas State. But I think this is a really good pickup for the Ducks and everything that he's able to do. Not used a ton as a pass catcher. I don't know if that's offense dependent or if it's just not a huge strength of his. He had 11 catches, as I mentioned earlier, this past year for 186 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I don't think this is somebody that, like De'Aaron Hill or Tre'Davious Ball, you're not lining him up in the slot and saying, hey, go out and make a play like that. No, he's very kind of prototypical 3-down physical bruising sort of back that also has home run potential. And we saw that with Jordon Davison this year, because we knew him as a short yardage guy, and then he evolved to being a truly complete back, and I think he's one of the best running backs in the country going into next season. The other thing with McMiller's tape, see a lot of 21 personnel sets where he's the ball carrier and he has a lead blocker. I wonder if he's capable as a blocker and he's just the best running back on his team, so you're not going to have him be a lead blocker in that area, or if he's not very good at it. We don't really know, but certainly he's got the size to, kind of be in that Davison role. Like I could see a pairing, because remember, Davison will be on the roster in 2027 because you have to play 3 years of college football. I could see a package where you put these two back there, and instead of, Davison and Hill being thunder and lightning, it's Davison and McMiller, and it's just thunder and thunder. I think there's a lot to like there. The one thing that I think he'll have to learn is when he gets to the college level, he's not always going to be able to go side to side. He does that a lot because he's really good at it and has that breakaway speed. There's some tackles, and he runs through arm tackles pretty well, but there's some tackles he avoids on his highlight reel that at the college level, especially in the Big Ten, he's not going to be able to get past, and he's going to have to be able to get north and south more consistently and just be able to pick up yards. Sometimes you're not always going to be able to break the home run when you start up the middle. Like, he has a lot of runs where he starts up the middle and he winds up running down the sideline. That's not impossible to do in college football. He's got the speed for it. It's certainly much tougher than it is no matter which high school that you play at. So nice pickup for the Ducks. Rashad Samples on a really good run recently. For those on YouTube, I'll throw up the graphic. This is the running back room that the Ducks have coming into this year with Davison and Hill, and then you've got Dink Riggs with the 2 incoming true freshmen, Tre'Davious Ball and Brandon Smith. Simeon Price, the Colorado transfer, I think is a depth piece, and then Price will obviously be done after this year, and we'll see if Oregon adds another running back for the class of 2027. They certainly could. There's also a bunch of youth in there. It's kind of crazy how young the room is. You look ahead to next year, Davison and Hill will be juniors. Dink Riggs, if he sticks around, will be a redshirt junior. And Tre'Davious Ball and Brandon Smith will be true sophomores. So a lot of depth, a lot of talent, a lot of versatility in the running back room. And Rashad Samples, who had the word on him when he came to Oregon that he was a really good recruiter, I think has lived up to that billing in a big way as Oregon's running backs coach. And, of course, he played a part in recruiting DeCorian Moore as well. So leave your thoughts in the YouTube comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, however you want to get in touch. As Oregon pushes for the playoff next year, it's worth examining what everybody else is going to have to go through. First, this episode brought to you by Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open when the pressure's on and you need the right hire. This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. They help you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for with things like skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping that the right candidate stumbles across your post. Here's a stat that really says it all. In the time I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Less time searching, more time interviewing candidates that can help. That's what you should be looking for. That is what Indeed sponsored jobs gets you. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now. Support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. You need to hire. This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. And you're listening to Locked On Ducks. Thank you for making it your first listen or your first view every day. If you listen to this show every day, complete the process and become a true everydayer by joining our new Locked On Everydayer Club. You get access to an ad-free audio version of Locked On Ducks and other perks as well, including a members-only Locked On Discord server where the other hosts at the network are in there poking around and chatting it up. So if you haven't, join the Locked On Everydayer Club today. All right, let's talk playoff for next year. If Oregon doesn't get there, next year especially, that would be a pretty massive disappointment. I've got a take here to evaluate from the good old Spencer scale of agreement, where you send me a take, and I tell you 1 to 10 how much I agree, half numbers included, and why. SSA, there will be no undefeated Big Ten or SEC teams in 2026 going into the playoff. This year you had Indiana going into the playoff, and that was it, because Georgia had lost a game, and Ohio State had just lost to Indiana, and Texas Tech had lost a game when they didn't have their quarterback, and then they lost another game, I think to Oregon, maybe? Yeah, I think it was like 23-0. Anyway, what a great line that was from Lanning. That could have been a candidate. I gave out an award recently for best Dan Lanning reaction, and Penn State was the clear answer there. But best halftime line, Dan Lanning. I've never seen a butt whooping that was this close. That was a pretty good one. So it's really hard to pick Indiana to lose. They're not going to win every football game until the end of time. So it's not as if it's unthinkable. Without Mendoza, even though Indiana's brought in an elite transfer portal class, one of the best in the entire country, depending on which service you look at. I love the quarterback they brought in, Josh Hoover. He'll fit really well. They've replaced their wide receivers. They brought in A.J. Harris, the corner from Penn State. They don't play anybody tough in their non-conference schedule. Their Big Ten slate has some losable games. I don't know that they can win them all again, but then again, I don't know. Kurt Cignetti doesn't really lose football games that often. My initial inclination is to put this really low on the SSA and say, nah, someone's going to be undefeated. But then you look around at the teams that are actually capable of doing it, and you say, well, hold on a minute. Georgia can always go undefeated. They have to play at Alabama and at Ole Miss. Now, if they win both of those games, they'll be in the SEC championship where they have won each of the last 2 years. Are they winning a third straight SEC championship? If they get there, maybe. Georgia's going to be really good, really talented, really good team, for sure. No undefeated SEC or Big Ten teams. I'm actually going to put this at a 7. And the reason is Ohio State's schedule is brutal. Ohio State has Texas on the road in a non-conference. Oregon goes to Columbus to play them. They have to play Michigan, and they have to play Indiana. And there's one other team I'm forgetting off the top of my head. Maybe Penn State, who's kind of a mystery wild card in there. Now, I expect Ohio State to be very good. And Ohio State was very good this past year and lost to Miami in the playoff because, well, sometimes that's the way the cookie crumbles. And Miami was a really good team. But the Big Ten and SEC, there's been this kind of generalized discussion out there about the SEC is deeper, but the Big Ten's better at the top. And I, for the last few years, haven't bought into that as much as everybody else. I think the middle of the SEC is not really any different than the middle of the Big Ten. And look, it's not a perfect system to evaluate. Vanderbilt played Iowa and was outplayed by the Hawkeyes, and Iowa had more losses in Big Ten play than Vanderbilt had in SEC play. Just as one example of several that I could cite over the last couple of years. The SEC is still a really good conference with a bunch of really good teams. I just do not subscribe to the SEC bias notion at all, as many folks have in the past, including myself. I think it used to be warranted, now just not so much. So bringing this back to Oregon for a moment before I turn this completely into a segment for Locked On College Football, I don't expect Oregon to go undefeated this year. Absolutely not. Do I think it's possible? Yes, because the team on paper is as good or better than any Dan Lanning has had before. I think the best team on paper he's still had was that 2024 group, who I predicted to go 12-0 in the regular season. They did. Won the Big Ten championship. Just didn't show up with the right game plan. And Dylan Gabriel, quarterback, was really good all season long. And Ohio State was able to game plan for him in a way that took away the Ducks' passing game in a significant way. Took away the entire offense, quite frankly. So I still think on paper, including last year, by the way, even though last year's team got further than the year before, I think on paper, 2024 was the best Oregon team that Dan Lanning has had. This team is in that realm. The experience, the veteran leadership they've got in a number of spots. Couple questions on the offensive line that I feel mostly okay about. I think Fox Crater can be really good at tackle. I think Janoris Wilson will be good enough at the other one. It's got to be a little telling that they went after Jordan Seaton and he winds up going to LSU as a 5-star transfer, and they obviously wanted him because they felt like he'd be better than what they currently have. But I feel fine about what they currently have at the tackle position. So, with Oregon's schedule, it is tough. I've talked about it before here on the show. The week where you go at Ohio State and host Michigan in back-to-back weeks, it might be in the other order, but that's pretty tough, especially when you remember Kyle Whittingham, who Dan Lanning has beaten twice in his tenure as Oregon's head coach, going back to the Pac-12 days, RIP. Kyle Whittingham is really good. And Michigan's roster is really good. And they brought over, they were already a good team with a good roster. Not great, but good. They brought over some of Utah's best guys. They brought over great coaches as well. Not just Kyle Whittingham, but their defensive coordinator, Jay Hill, is really, really good. That's going to be a much tougher game, and I'm glad Oregon has it at Autzen, but to play them in Ohio State back-to-back weeks, pretty darn brutal. And you have to play at USC. And you've got Washington at home. That's never going to be easy. So I'm not expecting Oregon to be one of those undefeated Big Ten teams. Ohio State's schedule also, as good as they are, makes it hard to see them going undefeated again. If they do, they're probably just going to roll to another national championship, which they could. Julian Zane's a really, really good quarterback who I like a lot. Like, I'd put him in the Dante Moore sort of realm. I think there are a lot of similarities between the two former 5-stars there. But Indiana, it feels like it's got to come to an end at some point. And then in the SEC, I just don't think any team in the SEC has separated from the rest of the conference enough for me to sit here and go, yeah, I think someone's going undefeated. I'm not likely to make that prediction. Now, things can change. It's February. Spring ball reports come out. An injury gets suffered here or there. I don't think there will be. So I'm going to put that at a 7. That, going into playoff resume debating season, which will be, early mid-December or so, I don't think there will be an undefeated Big Ten or SEC team. So putting that one at a 7. I bet that is higher than you thought I was going to give. But you know what? I'm full of surprises all over the place, including a surprise addition to the awards list for 2025. And how does Dana Altman fix it? First, this episode brought to you by Mazda. This is Mazda's moving the game forward for those who show there's more to the score than what is on the screen. And we're going off field and into the courtroom with Trinidad Chambliss. Down at Ole Miss, he and his team put in the extra work to put the Rebels right back into the national championship conversation going into next year. They put in every single bit of work required to get him eligible, and they were successful. And these sorts of moments remind us of what it really takes to raise the bar. It's the extra work off the field and sometimes in the courtroom, dialing in every detail, giving it that extra fire, that grit, and that I never quit mentality. Mazda puts that same passion into every model. Highlights make the reel. What it took to get there makes it count. There's more to a Mazda because there is more to you. This episode also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Have you ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here is how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right. Flights, tickets, the whole experience, it's all there. And on a nightly basis, if you think you know how the NBA is playing out, FanDuel gives you a chance to put your knowledge to the test. You will love all the different features and all the different sports that you can bet on this time of year. So, if you haven't already, check out FanDuel at FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. It is indeed that real. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, I have run through a bevy of awards. By the way, I need a trivia clue for Tuesday's show. Drop your submissions. We'll see who submits the best one. But come up with, gotta have the answer ready to go. Obviously, you don't send me the trivia answer ahead of time, but I got to be able to get back in touch with you so we can confirm that we've got the right answer when I follow up on it on Wednesday's show. But drop your trivia clues, and I'll pick what I think is the strongest one. But I've been going through awards, and then one of you sent me an award, said, hey, who is the most developed player for Oregon this past year? I thought, you know what? The actual language I was originally sent was most developed freshman. But I'm going to go and just tweak this a little and say best piece of development, best piece of coaching for an individual player. This was actually a pretty easy one to go to, but it's worth highlighting. The answer is Bryce Boettcher. Bryce Boettcher was one of the lowest rated guys in his class, known as a baseball player, was actually a safety before he made the transition to linebacker and then became Oregon's play caller, defensive leader, and leading tackler for 2 seasons in a row on a team that went to the college football playoff both times. I don't think they're, with the way Oregon has recruited guys, they have added a bevy of walk-ons. I mentioned them, mostly local recruits, from Lake Oswego or Central Catholic, Tualatin, all over the place across the state. Unless a guy like that turns into not just a contributor, but a high-level, all-conference caliber starter who leads Oregon in tackling, I don't know that we'll see anything like Bryce Boettcher again, because Oregon's just recruited every position so well, and they're bringing in guys that are ready to contribute earlier in their careers than Bryce Boettcher was. It might be kind of the last time that we see it, but you never know. You never know. You bring in guys because you feel like there's an opportunity somewhere. Maybe it's just on special teams. Maybe it's just to be a practice squad guy. Maybe you just like having local talent on the roster. But yeah, I think the best, piece of true coaching and development that Oregon staff has done with an individual player, it's got to be Bryce Boettcher. To get that handoff from Jeffrey Bassa and then go to Bryce Boettcher for 2 years has been huge. And I think the most likely guy to pick up that mantle is Jerry Mixon. Frankly, I think it has to be. From a play style, experience, and age standpoint, he's the most likely candidate. Devin Jackson would be the other one, but Mixon played more than Jackson this past year, I think for a reason. That's that he's just a better overall football player. But, not having Bryce Boettcher there, I hope we don't look back one day and say, man, remember when we just kind of said, I got to find a guy to replace Bryce Boettcher. And then all of a sudden there are just issues with, whether it's dealing with tempo, getting play calls communicated, or getting everybody organized. Someone has to be that guy. I think it's Jerry Mixon, but we'll have to wait and see. Last question to end today's show. What do you think is the reason or reasons why Oregon basketball program isn't elite year-round? It would appear Altman is a great coach, brings in good players, elite-level facilities, and endless NIL. Where's the disconnect? Hope all is awesome. Hope all is awesome with you too, man. Thanks for the question. So, couple things in there I got to push back on. The endless NIL, I don't think that the NIL situation in basketball is anywhere near where it is for football. I think there's a bit of a disconnect, and I'm not the only one that's talked about this or noted it over the last year or two. It doesn't feel like there is the same level of administrative and NIL buy-in for basketball, or frankly any sport, as there is for football. And it's okay for football to be a priority. I think there can still be more done in the basketball realm. Because the other point that you brought up in your question I want to push back on is, well, he brings in good players. Well, this past year he really didn't. Now, maybe that's a Dana Altman problem. Maybe that's an NIL problem. But the more I watch college basketball, and I watch a healthy amount to say the least, the more I see guys that are just light years beyond, from a talent standpoint, the players Oregon has on its roster. It's not particularly close. Even the good players that Oregon has, its three best players when fully healthy were the core returning trio from a season ago. Jackson Shelstad, Nate Biddle, and KJ Evans. How many other teams in the Big Ten do you think that trio of guys is on par with from a talent standpoint? I can rattle off probably a half dozen teams at least in the Big Ten that are above those three. Not that they aren't good or that I don't like them, but Nate Biddle is not super athletic and can get beat defensively sometimes because he's a little bit slow. He's also not the strongest big in the world. KJ Evans has to be a pick and roll, pick and pop, or a slasher. He's not creating his own shot very often because it's just, he wants to, but it's not something that he does very well. And Jackson Shelstad is the most skilled of the bunch. True three-level scorer, can take over a game, is also very small, and that can limit your ability sometimes. There's no one who has... Takai Simpkins might actually be the closest. I continue to be a Takai Simpkins fan. I hope he applies for and gets another year of eligibility. I'm a huge Takai Simpkins fan. I really am. He's cut down on the turnovers as he's adapted to a higher level of basketball. He shoots the ball well. He scores at every level. He works the defense. I like Takai Simpkins. He's a good player. But the disconnect that you're asking about in your question here is a combination of poor roster composition that has put a startling lack of depth of talent onto the court for this particular roster. I think NIL is a part of it that it's not as maxed out as you think. I don't think Dana Altman is as NIL and portal savvy as the coaches that he is going up against, and is one of the biggest arguments for the crowd that's in favor of moving on from Dana Altman. Now, I'm not, but I think that there is a continued evaluation that has to take place. You have to look and go, okay, this was an off year. If it's another off year, now we've got a trend, and I don't know how it turns itself around. But if it's one off year, don't know that that's necessarily enough. So for this particular year, they're elite because they missed with transfer acquisitions. You know, the guys they brought in, they are not good enough across the board. They are all behind. There's no, TJ Bamba was one of the best players they brought in last year. Brandon Angel was a great acquisition. And what those guys had in common is Dana Altman had played against them in the Pac-12 for years. And I think that was a part of the way that he was able to get them. Well, those were great, impactful acquisitions to where KJ Evans wasn't the only skilled four-man. Where TJ Bamba was a guy that could create his own shot and had a veteran presence. And Takai Simpkins can do that too. He can shoot. Bamba couldn't. But Bamba also much better driving to the basket. What Oregon's missing and what they have to find, whether that's from the high school level with Taj Ariza, the highly recruited guy who's coming in, or in the portal next year, they've got to have a wing that is even bigger than Simpkins, who's 6'3", 6'4". Like, they need a Dylan Brooks type. They need a guy who can get his own shot at any point in time, who's also going to be kind of a cultural leader. So, long-winded way of saying the off-season is when Dana Altman lost this year. And I know the injuries are making it worse. That's obviously true. Nate Biddle being there is hugely helpful. He was a big reason why they beat Penn State the other day and why they could beat Minnesota on Tuesday to get to double-digit wins. Yeah! This team had more flaws than that. The injuries made a bad situation worse, but it was still a bad situation. So, unfortunately, down note to end today's show. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.